an illness. That's the way he puts it. That wasn't quite the rationale, was it? It was because it's a biological condition women have to endure without being necessarily able to buy what to cope with.
And I don't want to get into this debate, but really, Tom, you've put your toes in where men should fear to tread.
Well, he did say that at the start of the column.
It doesn't forgive him for doing so.
The point
come on, that's just...
No.
I hate to say this, Michelle, but that's just nonsense. You're saying that a man can't express an opinion on what may be an issue of fairness in society?
I'm not saying he can't. I'm just saying that he is generalising about the effect that menstrual cycles have on women, and it is incorrect. That may be the effect it has on some women, but quite frankly, I am sick and tired of hearing about menstrual cycles. I actually the other day heard a discussion on a commercial radio breakfast program where they were discussing this particular issue, and it disgusted me. And I just think people should respect the privacy of some bodily functions.
Come on, you're misrepresenting the whole question here. The question is whether people, for example, who are on very low incomes, a woman who has
that wasn't what he said.
Well,
that wasn't what he said.
Well,
that may have been the reason why he wrote the article.
Yeah.
But that wasn't what he said. We're not talking here about the economics of people who actually need these products.
Well, that's exactly
in
what
order
we're talking
to live.
about.
He's making generalisations, saying that there's a point at which every woman is scary. And he's got that wrong.
Well, all right, we'll accept that bit is wrong. But the question is a reasonable question. So if you're living in a poor area and you have numerous daughters, it seems to me entirely reasonable that getting these products at the chemist or wherever you go to get them should be subsidised.
I don't have a problem with that.
You don't have a problem with that? Okay.
Yeah.
By Pharmac?
Good. Yes, why not?
So you're asking Pharmac, well, this is the moot point, isn't it? You're asking Pharmac to subsidise aspects of poverty, really.
Yes.
Well, but there are companies that do this already. There are companies that make these products for everyone you buy. They make a product available to somebody who needs it at no cost.
Really? Tell me more about that, because I've never heard of that.
Well, I'd like to tell you more about what Tom says, just to try and do him justice. He's trying to make a point, I think, that women lived without products, we all did, from supermarkets for centuries. And
thanks, Tom. You want us to go back to rags.
He talks about making our own bread, butter and soap in the old days and butchering our own mutton and pork and chopping the firewood.
Oh, well, he has just gone down in my estimation a bit because I didn't pick that bit up. But I think the concept of subsidising essential products for women, for poorer families, is entirely reasonable.
All right. And are we
I don't have a problem with that.
And are we less happy, because it's a wide-ranging article, from having forsaken purposeful hunting and gathering the way we used to do?
Well, he's welcome to go and live in the Amazon or wherever it is that they still do those things, but I'm not going to.
Okay. You wouldn't go with Tom into there?
I certainly
No, absolutely
Tom
not.
can go
Nor
by
would
himself.
I.
Or drag his woman along with him by her hair.
Oh, you are nasty.
Brian Edwards, thank you. Brian will be leaving with his mail, his heavy mail bag. Michelle Bogue, always nice to see you.
Thank you.
That is the panel for another day.
You didn't say that to me. It was always nice to see me.
Oh, God, stop being so sensitive.
Great seeing you, Brian.
Thanks, Jim.
We're back tomorrow. Here is Checkpoint, John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Record immigration numbers tonight. We seem to say that every month, don't we? A net gain of almost 72,000 people over the year to March. We look at the impact and we try to look beyond the politics. An off-duty police officer is in custody after the fatal shooting of a woman in Invercargill last night. We will have the details as a media conference at 5:30. The right to protest on Anzac Day or not. Facebook under fire after a second murder in less than a fortnight is broadcast on the social media site. Cyclones Debbie and Cook. Unexpected consequences, the very high price of vegetables and the very real shortage of some of them. America's first daughter, Ivanka Trump, gets booed. Donald is not getting his wall and Joseph Parker gets someone to fight.
RNZ News at 5. Ngā mihi nui, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batanaho. The police say they'll say more soon about the double shooting in Invercargill last night, in which some reports say the shooter was a police officer. A man is in custody. Logan Church reports.
The police were called to an address on Otapuni Avenue, Newfield, shortly after 8 o'clock last night, and a woman was found dead at the address. A man had received gunshot wounds and is in hospital in a stable condition. Another man is also being treated in hospital and is assisting the police with the investigation. In a statement this afternoon, a police spokesperson says they are unable to comment due to legal reasons, but they are still seeking witnesses. Detectives are not looking for anyone else in connection to the shooting. Ko Logan Church, Tēnei.
The Prime Minister says he's sure there was no negative intent involved in an airport security search of the outgoing Foreign Minister, Murray McCully. The screening happened last month in Auckland as Mr McCully was heading to Washington on official business, despite him being a VIP on a diplomatic passport. The Aviation Security Service says the screening is a requirement of the United States government. The Minister's office says the blunder was due to an administrative error in New Zealand. The Prime Minister, Bill English, says Mr McCully may have been surprised by the check.
There's a set of protocols around people on diplomatic passports. We just want to make sure they follow those protocols. And if there's any misunderstanding, we can clear it up. But I'm sure there wasn't any negative intent involved. It was probably just a mistake.
Bill English says random checks are part of border control and ministers should not be worried if they're being searched. The Immigration Minister acknowledges immigration is one factor in the pressure on cities, including Auckland, but says the solution is to increase supply in the likes of housing. Net migration in the year to March hit a new record high of nearly 72,000. The Labour Party says Auckland is groaning under the weight of more arrivals and wants an urgent review of immigration policy. The Minister, Michael Woodhouse, says the government tightened the rules last week and the settings are about right.
Look, strong growth in net migration is one contributing factor to infrastructure pressures, particularly in Auckland. There's no denying that. But I think what most commentators would agree is that the congestion and housing price issues are definitely supply-side issues.
Michael Woodhouse says Labour should front up and say how much it would cut immigration by and what sectors it would affect the most. An alpine climbing group says it's devastated to learn 2 of its members were killed when they fell from a cliff face in Fiordland. The police have yet to name the men. However, the New Zealand alpine team says they were Connor Smith and Sawan Chand. Maya Burry reports.
The pair were reported missing on Monday afternoon. A helicopter found their bodies at the bottom of a climbing face below Marion Peak in the Darren Mountains. The men were roped together. The Alpine team says details of the accident are not fully known, but it's likely one of the men fell before he was able to fix himself to the rock face and his companion was pulled down with him. It says both men were experienced and competent mountaineers, and to lose 2 friends and teammates in this way is devastating. This is Maya Burry.
New Zealand First is backing its Chief of Staff, David Broome, whose 12-year-old son reprimanded a peace activist during yesterday's Anzac service in Wellington. The boy started yelling at Laura Drew during a television interview, saying it was wrong and inappropriate to be protesting against New Zealand's involvement in war on Anzac Day. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters agrees and says there are 364 other more appropriate days in the year to protest.
Free speech and the right to protest is an essential part of our democracy. But to go along to an event like that, when people are trying to commemorate as a nation and criticise people for being engaged in war, many of whom were there having lost loved ones, was just not appropriate.
Winston Peters. The Electricity Authority is considering getting its money back after it found serious flaws in a report it commissioned into changes to the prices paid to use the national grid. Its chief executive, Carl Hansen, wouldn't say how much the consultants were paid, but said it was a relatively small part of the authority's $77 million budget, less than 0.5%. He didn't believe the authority had followed an inadequate process in hiring the Australian consultants Oakley Greenwood and said they had good references. But Mr Hansen said they're determined to push on with changes in the pricing as the current model wasn't sustainable. It's 5 past 5. To sport, and the WBO heavyweight boxing champion Joseph Parker is relieved his 3-month training camp hasn't been in vain. Parker will defend his title against 2-metre-tall Romanian Răzvan Cojanu in Auckland next week, after the mandatory challenger Hughie Fury withdrew from the fight last week, citing a back injury. Despite Cojanu being well down the rankings compared to Fury, Parker says the Romanian is more dangerous as the pair know each other well.
The reason I say that, he's got power, but also he knows how I fight. He knows my styles and techniques. He's been in camp with us before. So it's a fight where I'm looking forward to seeing who's going to figure who out first.
The fight has been moved from the 12,000-seat Spark Arena in downtown Auckland to the 3,000-seat Vodafone Event Centre in Manukau. The New Zealand basketballer Steve Adams and his Oklahoma City Thunder have been eliminated from the NBA playoffs. Oklahoma was beaten 105-99 by the Houston Rockets in Game 5 of the opening round of the Western Conference playoffs, losing the best-of-7-game series 4-1. Chelsea's extended their lead at the top of English football's Premier League with a 4-2 win over Southampton, moving them to 7 points clear of their nearest rivals Tottenham. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Benjamin Ziman examines the enigma of Karl Mayr, who taught Hitler how to be a spy and encouraged his early political ambitions. Didn't end up that well for him. He died in an SS forced labour camp. This week's overseas correspondent is Shobha Narayan on the line from India, and we have a window on the world of the Indonesian island of Sulawesi, where locals keep their dead rallies at home while they save up for the funeral. It's all on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, fine spells, isolated showers today, mainly in the east. For the remainder of the North Island, mainly fine, some areas of low cloud or fog tonight and tomorrow morning. Isolated showers developing tomorrow morning across the ranges of Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington. Western Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, fine today. Cloudy periods and a few light showers tomorrow, especially about the ranges. For the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury to Southland, fine today, but high cloud developing tomorrow, with a few spots of rain developing in the south during the evening. Westland and Fiordland, mostly cloudy, with a few light showers, turning to rain in Fiordland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Northerly strengthening tomorrow with gales in exposed places. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, with fine breaks developing later tomorrow. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Coming up, immigration numbers, the politics, and a call to move beyond the politics, if that is possible in election year, plus Donald Trump and his wall. Where is it and who is going to pay? In fact, Congress seems to be the wall. All of that is coming up, but we're going to begin very briefly in Invercargill, where an off-duty police officer is tonight in custody after his wife was shot dead and another man injured. The incident happened just after 8 o'clock last night in an industrial area in the suburb of Newfield. Now, Checkpoint has independently confirmed the couple, who has 3 children, had recently separated, and the dead woman was in a new relationship with the injured man. The police officer handed himself in shortly after the incident, but those are the only details we're going to release at this time, because the Southern District Commander, Superintendent Paul Basham, said in a statement the injured man is being treated for gunshot wounds in hospital and assisting the police in their investigation. The situation is developing, and as we go to air, Superintendent Basham is saying he's going to hold a media conference at about 5:30 with the latest. So we are saying no more before that media conference. We will have details the moment that the Invercargill Police have held that media conference in about 21 minutes from now. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint on RNZ. We move on now to immigration, and it was already shaping up to be a key election issue. New figures out today certainly won't change that. Another record high, more fuel for politicians who say too many people are coming into New Zealand, and more fuel for the debate about the pressure immigration is having on the country's infrastructure and housing, particularly in Auckland. Official figures show a seasonally adjusted net gain of 6,100 people in the month of March, taking the annual gain to a fresh record of 71,900. Later in the programme, economist Shamabeel Jacobs points out that the National Party became government after campaigning that too many people were leaving New Zealand. Remember that stadium of 35,000? Well, now Labour is saying too many are arriving. Outside of politics, what is our population strategy, he asks. But, of course, this isn't outside politics, which is why we begin with our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The migration gains were driven by continuing strong numbers of students and backpackers coming into the country, as well as returning New Zealanders. Last week, the government moved to tighten the rules for skilled work visas and limit the time unskilled workers can stay in the country. The Labour leader Andrew Little, who said net migration needs to be cut by tens of thousands, says that's not enough.
We cannot continue to absorb 70,000 plus people a year, given that most settle in Auckland, and Auckland is now congested, its schools are overcrowded, hospitals can't keep up, and it's a city that is already 50,000 houses short of what is needed to house the population that's there at the moment. We have to do things differently. We need a fresh approach.
The Immigration Minister Michael Woodhouse says Labour should come clean about what it would do in government.
They're still talking about tens of thousands fewer migrants without any sort of detail about where those cuts would be made. So I think what the Labour Party needs to do is be upfront with New Zealanders about which particular economies they plan to nobble, whether that's the Canterbury rebuild, international students, or growing horticulture and farming sectors.
Satish Ranchhod, a senior economist at Westpac, says the record figures reflect the strength of the economy and show no sign of dropping back for now.
We expect that immigration levels will remain pretty firm over the remainder of this year, but they're likely to ease back from the current highs we're seeing. We're expecting that as the economies offshore gradually improve, more New Zealanders will eventually look to move overseas.
He says the government's new rules will have some impact.
The tightening in immigration rules that we're seeing is likely to see a bit of a moderation in inflows over the next few years, but with much of the strength in migration we're seeing owing to movements of New Zealanders, we think it's going to remain strong for some time yet.
The ACT Party leader David Seymour says the problem's not the number of people coming to New Zealand, but the failure to properly invest in housing and transport networks. But he says there are some aspects of immigration policy that could be tightened up.
There's some areas around parental reunification that should be reduced. I think we should stop people getting a free ride on education and healthcare if they're not actually paying tax in New Zealand, but sending their kids to school and their parents to hospital every other day while paying tax to a foreign government in their country of origin.
The tourism boom also shows no sign of easing. Visitor numbers rose 9% in March on a year ago, taking the annual total to more than 3.5 million. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
So what does the Prime Minister Bill English say? Well, he was asked by media if he's concerned that migration has remained higher for longer than anticipated.
Oh, we're not concerned. I think it shows the attractiveness of New Zealand to a lot of different sorts of people from overseas. But the numbers do appear to be flattening out. We need the skills for the growth, and we've been, making regular changes in the rules around immigration to make sure that we're getting the skills that we need.
When will those changes kick in?
Well, the ones made last year have kicked in. Recent announcements are being consulted on, and they'll come into place before too long. But it's all about just making sure we get the best match of the skills coming in. I see some of our opponents are looking at cutting it by 50,000. They need to show just where that's going to happen, because that could have quite a big impact on skills needed for industries like IT, our freight, trucking industry. And others.
Do the government's changes go far enough, given these numbers? There has been an inward surge. Do they go far enough, your changes?
Oh, we think it's about the right balance. As I said, the numbers are flattening out, and we would expect that they'll stay flattish. There's a constant pressure for the skills you need, particularly for industries that might move overseas if the people don't come here, but also for our core industries. And it's the sustained growth of the economy, including the need to build infrastructure and houses, is creating strong demand for the skills. I mean, to get the houses and the roads built and the schools, we need people coming in to help us with those jobs.
Bill English, the Prime Minister, talking a short time ago. Later on Checkpoint, we talked to Shamabeel Yaacob, the economist, who says, what is our population strategy? And if we don't have one, then what exactly are the politicians trying to achieve? That interview after 6 o'clock. Do stay with us. New Zealand First is backing its Chief of Staff, David Broome, whose 12-year-old son reprimanded a peace activist during yesterday's Anzac service. The party says protesting on Anzac Day is disrespectful and designed to garner cheap media attention, but the protest protest itself was silent. The Broome family protest against it, much less so. Here's our political reporter, May Heron.
It just leaves a sour taste.
David Broome and his son Gate crashed a News Hub interview with protester Laura Drew.
For goodness sake, do it tomorrow, do it the day before, do it any day but today. It is wrong, wrong, wrong.
And it's just inappropriate.
You are so inappropriate. I cannot believe this.
Miss Drew says David Broome had already expressed his views to them that morning and had returned with his son when the TV cameras were rolling.
You're not here to do this, you're here to make a political point.
You aren't here to say, lest we forget, we need to remember the dead. You're here to say, oh look, it's free publicity. Let's go and make the most of it.
Miss Drew's group, Peace Action, was at the Wellington wreath-laying service holding a banner which read, "Lest we remember, no New Zealand support for war."
So when he interrupted, I just tried to listen to what he was saying, to hear him out. Boy was obviously quite upset with our presence there.
She says they had mixed reaction that day, though a lot of it was positive.
We've had some people say, you know, they're really supportive of what we're doing and come and stand with us and give us a thumbs up and hugs. And we've had some people say, you know, they disagree. They don't think Anzac Day is the day to do that.
New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters is backing his Chief of Staff. He says there are 364 other more appropriate days in the year to protest against war.
Free speech and the right to protest is an essential part of our democracy. But to go along to an event like that, when people are trying to commemorate as a nation, and there's no more unifying experience than Anzac Day for New Zealanders, regardless of their political background, and criticise people for being engaged in war, many of whom were there having lost loved ones, was just not appropriate.
In 2007, protester Valerie Morse set fire to a New Zealand flag during an Anzac Day service. Her conviction for offensive behaviour was eventually thrown out by the Supreme Court after she argued she had the right to freedom of expression. Ms Morse says Anzac Day is a political event and the country's involvement in war should be discussed.
Anzac Day is now used by the state as a means to promote current and contemporary wars. So it's really not just a day of remembrance, it's a political day. And as a political day, it is a very appropriate day to talk about New Zealand's involvement in wars.
The Prime Minister, Bill English, says everyone has a right to protest as long as it's done lawfully.
What we're remembering on Anzac Day is people who gave their lives for freedom, and part of that freedom is the ability to protest. So people have the right to express a point of view. I would just hope on Anzac Day it's done respectfully.
Meanwhile, Laura Drew is unfazed by this year's clash and says her Peace Action group will be back out again next Anzac Day. From Parliament for Checkpoint, May Heron.
Coming up on Checkpoint, Donald Trump hits a wall. It's called Congress. Ivanka Trump gets booed in Germany. The impact of cyclones Debbie and Cook on your vegetable crops and the price you're paying for them at the supermarket, if you can even get them. Joseph Parker finds someone else to fight less than 48 hours after Huey Fury pulled the pin, citing a back injury, and much more coming up. You can text us on 2101 if you have feedback on any of the stories we're running. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. And don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook, on Face TV, which is Sky Channel 83, and on Freeview Channel 50. However you are joining us, thank you for being with us. Facebook is under scrutiny once again after a second murder was posted on the social media site in less than a fortnight. In the most recent case, an 11-month-old baby girl was killed by her father while he streamed the murder live on Facebook before taking his own life at a deserted hotel in Thailand. A warning, this story contains distressing content, obviously. But the issue is now a big one, with the number of platforms offering live streaming increasing. Whose responsibility is it to prevent such material going out live? And as Edward Gay reports, a social media professor says while disturbing, Facebook cannot be held responsible.
Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg speaking only just last week after Steve Stevens randomly killed an elderly man and posted the video on Facebook before taking his own life.
And there's a lot to do here. We have a full roadmap of products to help build groups and community, help build a more informed society, help keep our communities safe. And we have a lot more to do here. And we're reminded of this this week by the tragedy in Cleveland. And our hearts go out to the family and friends of Robert Godwin Sr. And we have a lot of work, and we will keep doing all we can to prevent tragedies like this from happening.
Less than 2 weeks after promising a review, Facebook's under fire again. This time after a father in Thailand filmed 2 videos of himself killing his 11-month-old daughter Natalie on Facebook Live before taking his own life. The videos were viewed more than 300,000 times, but were only removed after the BBC alerted the social media company.
Facebook, just like especially YouTube and all the others, could not possibly monitor every single thing that's uploaded. And so it becomes, the burden is on us.
But Karen North, a social media professor at the University of Southern California, says while both incidents were disturbing, the company can't be held responsible.
Legally speaking, and in terms of business practices, they are immune from being responsible or held responsible for content because they don't put up the content. They provide a broadcast network for us to put up our content.
Ms. North says Facebook relies largely on reports from its 1.9 billion users to find objectionable material, and there's little the company can do to better police the content users upload.
In the case of violent crime, how do you know whether the violent crime is a real violent crime or a movie that somebody, that somebody posted? You don't know. So it's very hard for the robots to make human decisions.
The grieving mother of the baby girl spoke after her daughter's funeral, saying her former partner had become violent recently and had started lashing out at her 5-year-old son from a previous relationship. Facebook's declined to be interviewed, but maintains it's working hard to improve software that automatically flags objectionable video. For Checkpoint, Edward Gay.
Lots of feedback coming in on the Anzac Day protest. We'll have some of it shortly. Thank you all. You might have noticed over the last week or so a shortage of veggies at your local supermarket or fruit shop or greengrocer. Greens like cauliflower, spinach, lettuce, in fact leafy greens in general, are either out of stock or unusually expensive, outrageously expensive. Well, blame Debbie. Yes, the national shortage is a result of heavy rain and flooding brought by both Cyclone Debbie and Cyclone Cook. But it's not just a consumer issue. The farms where your produce comes from is where the impact is being felt the most. We sent Zach Fleming out to one in Auckland today, and he found out the shortage might last for several months.
After Cyclone Debbie at the end of last month, and then Cook just a fortnight later, some of Kieran Hari's crops were completely underwater.
Yeah, so the amount of rain that the ground sort of took on, the plants just weren't able to grow, basically. Now the warm sun sort of coming on them, sort of just rotting.
His family's been farming vegetables in Pukekohe since 1940, 77 years.
So we grow lettuce, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, some pumpkins and onions.
To jog your memory, just in case, the cyclones brought with them a month of rain in one day in some places. That much rain obviously had an immediate impact on some farmers' crops. But Kieran says the worst effects are only just starting to come through now.
The amounts coming up especially are going to be going downhill, and the yield that we've managed to get out of the fields is being down. So if we were cutting 80-90% sort of before the storm, we're down to 40 and 50% of what we were harvesting and having to leave the rest behind.
Kieran's farm supplies direct to supermarkets. If his crops are impacted, consumers are impacted. Checkpoint's heard supermarkets across Auckland have been selling out of leafy greens over the past week or so, something practically unheard of, especially at ones in the central city suburbs.
These plants that we're standing in here are sort of due for harvest now, and they're still 10 days away really. Maybe more.
And when supply goes down, prices go up. One woman told Checkpoint she paid $8 recently for a single cauliflower. But for growers like Kieran, the impact isn't just not being able to make his favourite salad.
It could be up until July, August. We've got crops just across there that are due to be harvested in June, July, and yeah, it's just a case of whether they'll grow and how they'll grow. That sort of 30-40% off harvest that we're losing sort of impacts directly on any possible profits.
And in 3 months, when the salad shortage ends, United Fresh President Jerry Prendergast says we'll then have a root veggie one, especially kumras.
The majority of the kumras in New Zealand are grown in the far north, Dargaville region. Now, Dargaville experienced some tremendous amount of rain during that last downpours that we received during that Cyclone Debbie and Cook. Both of those really did hit that region heavy. And that was at about the key time when most growers were due to be harvesting and storing kumara for quite a long period of time. Now, believe it or not, there was also a problem prior to that. Remember January, February, pretty dry.
He says it's too early to say how badly potato crops will be affected.
The ground is significantly challenging right now in terms of getting the product out. You could imagine putting machinery in on waterlogged, sodden ground is a massive challenge. And not only to get it out of the ground, but then to clean it and prepare it and get it ready for us to consume, or at least even pick up off the shelf.
And Jerry's calling for some empathy from consumers. He says just choose different veggies for a bit if you have to.
When they've got to put more resources in, they've got to actually have more equipment out there, they've got to take more time to do it. There's no question, it costs them. And if their yield is down, they never get the return on that. So yes, this is going to affect growers.
For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Coming up after the 5:30 headlines, we go to Washington. But let's have some sport before Katrina joins us. Less than 48 hours after Hughie Fury pulled out of his WBO world heavyweight fight against Joseph Parker in somewhat inexplicable circumstances, a new contender has touched down in Auckland. Romanian Razvan Kojanu will now fight Parker on May 6th after British boxer Fury pulled out at the weekend, citing a back injury. But with Kojanu being a significant step down in class from the unbeaten Fury, will it be another knockout for Parker? And what about ticket sales? Sally Murphy reports.
Original contender Hughie Fury is ranked second in the WBO, but now Parker, who is the champion, will take on number 14, Romanian Razvan Kojanu. The list of Kojanu's wins features no major scalps. There's clearly a drop in quality of fight, but Parker is not seeing it that way.
Me and Raz, we've done sparring together. The way I see this fight, it's actually a lot more dangerous in the Fury fight. The reason I say that, he's got power, but also he knows how I fight. He knows my styles and techniques. He's been in camp with us before. So it's a fight where I'm looking forward to seeing who's going to figure who out first.
Parker says he's been training hard, but admits he'll have to change tact now he's got a new, taller component.
My focus is just purely on being prepared for May 6th, training hard, just being 100% physically, mentally in great shape. So I'm grateful that now I have an opponent who's down here in New Zealand, and I look forward to being in the ring and letting my hands go and hopefully hitting someone.
Razvan Kojanu, who's had 300 amateur fights, says he knows Parker's mistakes and is ready to take him on in the ring.
I know a lot of his strategies, which he used with Dimitrenko, which he want to use right now with Fury. And I know him, and I know myself. In the camp, I did like 50, 60, 70% maximum. In the fight, I'm going to go 100%.
Sky boxing commentator Mike Ango says the fight will pose a stern challenge for Parker.
I think he hits harder than Hughie Fury. He had 300 amateur fights, and he's very, very highly credentialed. He's got a nasty left hook, particularly to the head and the body. And coming from that height that he throws it, that'll create some difficulties for Joe.
Mr. Ango says although he's got a new opponent, Parker should still be well prepared.
You've got to remember that the original fight was scheduled in April, so essentially he's seen out at least 1.5, almost 2 camps. So he'll have itchy trigger finger, I guess is the best way to put it. He just simply wants to fight.
The May 6th fight has been moved from Spark Arena, which holds about 12,000, to the much smaller Vodafone Event Centre, which seats around 3,000 people. Fight promoter Duco's David Higgins said some sponsors have pulled out, but they're confident the event will be a sellout. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
Coming up on Checkpoint, a police officer is in custody after his wife was shot dead in Invercargill last night. We'll have the latest from a police media conference due to get underway in the next few minutes as Invercargill police update us on the situation there. US President Donald Trump has until the end of the week to find funding to build his much talked about wall, and he ain't going to get that money from Congress. And the mother of an intellectually disabled man calls a public meeting in Dunedin tonight about program cuts by IDEA services. All of that and more coming up. Lots of feedback coming in on two subjects. One, immigration. This by text: immigration is an infrastructure issue, not a racial one. If you have only one spare bedroom, you don't invite 100 people to come and stay. We'll be discussing population strategies with Shamabeel Jacob after the 6 o'clock news, and the Anzac Day protest and the intervention by that young fellow. Anne says Anzac Day, our annual day of commemoration and time for contemplation of the tragedies of war, is surely an appropriate time to express views about these tragedies and New Zealand's involvement in military action. We certainly used it as a forum for protest against the Vietnam War back in the day. As far as I can tell, the women protesting about events in Afghanistan were acting in a perfectly seemly way, and the young boy who ranted at them appears to have been acting as a New Zealand First tool and indulging in pure grandstanding, most inappropriate. Thank you for your feedback, and thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. And it is still 5:30. Well, it's not any longer because it's now 5:31, but we're dangerously close to being on time. Katrina Batten.
We really are. The police are promising to reveal more details soon about last night's double shooting in Invercargill. A man is in custody. The police say they're unable to comment further at this stage. They're still seeking witnesses, but are not looking for anyone else in connection with the shooting. The Prime Minister is playing down an airport security search of the outgoing Foreign Minister Murray McCulley, despite him travelling as a VIP on a diplomatic passport. The Minister's office says it was a blunder due to an administrative error in New Zealand. Bill English says random checks are part of border control and ministers should not be worried about being searched. The government admits immigration is a factor in the pressure on cities like Auckland, but says the solution is to increase supply in essentials like housing. The Labour Party says Auckland is groaning under the weight of more arrivals and wants an urgent review. The Immigration Minister, Michael Woodhouse, says the rules have been tightened and the settings are about right. Climbers from the same alpine club as the two men killed in Fiordland say Connor Smith and Sarwan Chand were experienced and competent mountaineers. They say it's likely one of them fell before he was able to fix himself to the rock face, pulling his companion down with him. New Zealand First is backing its Chief of Staff, David Broome, whose 12-year-old son told off a peace activist during yesterday's Anzac service in Wellington. The boy started yelling at the demonstrators, saying it was wrong and inappropriate to be protesting against New Zealand's involvement in war. The party leader, Winston Peters, agrees and says there are 364 other more appropriate days in the year to protest. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. More support for the protesters coming in. Georgie T. Sweeney says, just writing to support the courageous young silent protesters who were abused at a memorial service. Anzac Day initially commemorated the invasion of Turkey by New Zealand and Australia. It's come to represent other conflicts, but the sacrifice of our parents and all the people who perished in terrible war situations is diminished when it is treated as an event frozen in time. My father fought in World War II and marched each Anzac Day. He and his army friends then got together after the march and talked about the various battles, but mostly they talked about the horrors of war and their dislike of politicians who promoted the false idea of war as an event. My mother was an army nurse and cared for prisoners of war returning from Japan. Both parents schooled us in the needs and the perils of defending one's country. The shouting boy damns himself and the political party his father advises. It would be interesting to know if the boy's father is a veteran. Thanks for Checkpoint. Thank you, Georgie T. Sweeney. Let's go to business news now with our business editor this week, Giles Beckford, who is joining us from Wellington. Flat old times in the dairy business, unless you are A2 milk, Giles.
If you're A2 milk, you are rolling in clover. Quite literally, perhaps, for some of its suppliers. Yes, this is the company which has specialty milk products, and in particular baby formula, which is in the hot demand in Australia and China in particular. It had been expecting that the second half of its trading year would be slower than the first half, and that was a strong performance. But it said it expected there would be fewer selling opportunities. It does a lot of its trading on e-commerce sites. But it turns out that in China in particular, Demand continues to exceed supply. Really strong orders. So the company has updated its outlook, and it says it now expects that, in fact, it will have stronger demand in the second half than it did in the first. And that means that its full year earnings will rise, this is revenue, will rise to $525 million or thereabouts. Now that would compare with last year's $350 odd million. Do the maths and you can see that it's actually a really strong lift in revenue. Not surprisingly, A2 Milk, which has been one of the darlings of the share market, jumped 8% today, the share price, to a record high of around $3.60 or thereabouts. And one would have to say that we'll continue to hear more from A2 Milk as it continues to make market shares.
Yeah, gosh, they've been having a great run. Warning for investors about telecommunications company Spark. What's this about, Giles?
Well, normally we wouldn't sort of go into these. This is what we call low ball offers, and it's from a company called Zero Commission. Now, for those of you who may be familiar, that's a company, and there are other operators like it, that offers significantly less than the share market price. And they do this because they say, we're covering the broking fees, and therefore we're justified in offering you less. Now, in fact, there's a significant difference for Spark. The price today has been $3.68 and Zero Commission is offering $3.34. That's a 10% difference. Now, they do tend to target holders of small parcels of share. Clearly, they're hoping to aggregate them and then they make a profit by selling them at a higher cost. You have to say that at best they are a predatory outfit. And I would only say that in the past...
At best, Giles.
At best they are a predatory outfit. I make no other comment than to say that should you be the one who receives an offer from Zero Commission and you are thinking of selling, get the best professional advice possible.
Excellent, Giles Beckford. What happened on the markets today?
Well, a happy share market. Our top 50 index had its best gain, 115 odd points, 1.5%. That's a 5-month high. The share market, its best level in 6 months. And the New Zealand dollar dragged low today by weak Australian inflation numbers. And just explain, the Aussie dollar fell because the prospect of a rate rise over there has receded, and that dragged the Kiwi with it. Consequently, Kiwi trading at 69.2 US cents and just under 92 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks, Giles. Let's turn now to the wall with the time at 23 minutes to 6 on Checkpoint. We will build the wall, said Donald Trump during his presidential campaign over and over again. Not exactly the Gettysburg Address, but as a branding exercise that seems to have worked, of course. Trump got the presidency. Now, it's time to make it happen and to pay for it, and it seems that Donald Trump can't. President Trump has until the end of the week to get his federal spending plans through Congress, and Democrats have threatened to block those plans if money for the wall is included. The end of this week is also the end of the new president's first 100 days in office. So much was promised, so much less delivered in those first 100 days. In short, with Donald Trump insisting the wall will happen, the questions are when, how, and with what? With more from Washington, here's the BBC's John Sopel.
Mr. President, are you going to insist on border funding?
Donald Trump made his fortune as a builder. Now the president is staking a huge amount of political capital on the most controversial construction project of his life, a 2,000-mile-long wall to separate the US from its southern neighbour Mexico. And no one can say it's come out of the blue. It was almost his campaign theme tune.
We're going to do the wall, and by the way, who's going to pay for the wall? Who's going to pay for the wall? Who?
But the Mexicans have been blunt in their response. We're not paying a peso towards it, something the economy minister spelt out today to the BBC.
If they decide to do it, it's in their own sovereign right. The only thing that is clear is that there is no way Mexico is going to pay for it.
So Donald Trump, initially at least, will have to rely on the US taxpayer.
Busy day.
And though there's growing acceptance that's not going to happen right now, he's still talking tough.
The wall gets built, 100%. Thank you very much. Thank you.
When will the wall get built? When will the wall get built?
It'll start soon. Very soon. We're already preparing. We're doing plans. We're doing specifications.
But the government runs out of money this Friday and could face another shutdown like it did 4 years ago, when thousands of staff were laid off and federal buildings and monuments closed. Democrats will agree to an emergency funding package, but only if the White House removes the proposed expenditure on the wall. And although Republicans do have a majority in the Senate, it's slim. And to get this measure passed, you need what's called a supermajority, 60 votes. And they only have 52. President Trump, approaching his 100th day in office, has faced a stark choice. Either a government shutdown or a personal climb down. Because in Democratic senators, the president has come across a rock-solid wall which there is no way round. It's been a harsh lesson in the differences between the ease of campaigning and the struggles of governing. It's left Democrats savouring another victory.
It's really good news that the president seems to be taking the wall off the table in the negotiations we're having on an appropriations bill this week.
The White House unveiled a new website today to celebrate the president's 100 days. It's been high energy and high tempo, a raft of executive orders and growing economic confidence. But on his 3 signature policies, the travel ban, health reform and now the border wall, Donald Trump hasn't succeeded in the way that he promised.
That's the BBC's John Sopel, of course. Donald Trump is facing Congress, and the woman known as America's first daughter has been facing the G20 Women's Summit in Berlin. Ivanka Trump, who is a special advisor in President Donald Trump's White House, was invited to take part in a high-powered panel discussion at the summit. But her attempts to defend her father's attitude towards women met with groans. She struggled to define what exactly her role is inside the White House. And at one stage, she was jeered by people in the audience. This report from the ABC's Steve Kinane.
Ivanka Trump shared a stage in Berlin with German Chancellor Angela Merkel, IMF chief Christine Lagarde and Queen Maxima of the Netherlands. The summit was all about female empowerment, and Ms Trump soon found out that with power comes scrutiny.
What is your role and whom are you representing? Your father as the President of the United States, the American people, or your business?
Well, certainly not the latter, and I am rather unfamiliar with this role as well, as it is quite new to me. It has been a little under 100 days, but it has just been a remarkable and incredible journey.
Ivanka Trump has an office in the White House and is regarded as one of the most influential people in her father's administration. Yet even she struggles to explain what her role is. She appeared to be on more comfortable ground when the conversation moved to paid parental leave.
Sadly, the United States is one of the only countries in the world, the only developed country in the world that doesn't have a paid leave policy for the benefit of families. So that is something I'm very, very proud of my father's advocacy. Long before he came into the presidency, but during the campaign, including in the primaries, he's been a tremendous champion of supporting families and enabling them to thrive.
It's hard to pick up from the onstage microphones, but these comments led to jeers and boos from the crowd. When challenged by the moderator about her father's attitude to women, Ms Trump answered the question more like a daughter than a White House official.
Thousands of women who have worked with and for my father for decades are a testament to his belief and solid conviction in the potential of women and their ability to do the job as well as any man. I think in my personal experience, and you were asking me about my role as daughter and also advisor, as a daughter, I can speak on a very personal level, knowing that he encouraged me and enabled me to thrive.
Ivanka Trump's appearance at this summit is all down to Angela Merkel. The German Chancellor may have got a frosty reception from Donald Trump last month, but she realises she can open up a back channel to the president through his influential daughter and advisor.
That report from the ABC. Let's head home again. Coming up, we're going to look at the Electricity Authority And it is very much under fire because of serious flaws in a report that predicated some fairly major changes in pricing. That's coming up. But let's go to Dunedin first. The mother of an intellectually disabled man says she organised a meeting in Dunedin tonight about program cuts by Idea Services because families urgently need some answers. The agency, which is part of IHC, announced a month ago it would stop providing a range of disability services to about 800 families, including facility-based respite care, foster care, home support and holiday programs. It's also been criticised for dropping a major autism support contract with the government that had helped 3,000 families. A group of parents backed by the Labour MP for Dunedin South, Claire Curran, is holding a public meeting tonight to air their concerns. And our Dunedin reporter Ian Telfer met one parent as she prepared for the meeting this afternoon.
I've got all this information here regarding the exiting of services by IHC, and
in her living room in Dunedin, Sandra Patterson's going through dozens of emails, press releases and media reports.
I was hours on the internet finding things, and I thought I was right up with the play, but I'm not. For anybody to try and find out where to get information or support, it's a minefield.
Ms Patterson says what galls her most is despite being a member and client of IHC for more than 20 years, she's hardly heard from the organisation now cutting her services.
The lack of communication and information is just appalling. They're supposed to be, there to support parents, and they're not.
Sandra Patterson's son, Sam, who's intellectually disabled, is 30 years old now and has been through a range of IHC and Idea Services programs over the years.
We started off, our boy used to go to the holiday programs, which was wonderful. That was based at Waikola. And then we've had home support, which is a person comes and takes Sam out and about in the community, like go to movies or going for a walk or walk the dog or do something, go out and do something. So it's sort of like a buddy, but they're paid. And so we've had that for years.
And was that good? Did it make a difference?
It did, because Sam sort of had a friend, like he hasn't got any friends, so it was somebody other than Mum taking him out and about.
Ms Patterson says she fears that service won't continue when the new providers take over. She says families were suddenly told by Idea Services in January Dunedin's main respite care centre in Waikola Avenue in St Clair was closing. And then in March they found out they were dumping a range of services. Idea Services says it's decided to withdraw to focus on its core business activities of residential and day services. It says there will be no disruption in services, which will be picked up by new providers. And it says it's made every effort to notify all the families affected by its program exits. But Ms Patterson says IHC has lost the plot.
They say it's a troubling time for people, worrying time, blah, blah, blah. But they don't care. They would have been more concerned and more forthcoming with information if they had been concerned. And I'm really concerned that the whole focus of IHC, Idea Services, has changed. They've lost it. The IHC was set up by parents for parents. That's what it was supposed to be for, but it's not. Now it's a business, and so all their services have gone, and they are saying their core services are residential care and vocational programs, but that's not what they were set up for.
To make things worse for Idea Services, about 1,000 staff of theirs are going out on strike tomorrow morning for an hour in protest at stalled pay negotiations. Ms Patterson says tonight's meeting needs to send a clear message.
I think we need to tell them that we're not happy with the whole process of how they've gone about this. And, life's bad enough, stressful enough without having to worry about all this as well. And I look back and I sort of think we fought all these fights all these years ago, and it's just all happening again, and I just think, what's happening? I know there's the infinite, finite money, but I think if they had used it better and listened to what parents wanted, it would have been more successful.
The meeting starts at 7 o'clock at the Caversham Baptist Church. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Ian Telfer.
Thanks, Ian, and we'd love to hear from parents who feel that they are in a similar situation or any variation of that situation. Please text us 2101 or perhaps email us checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. This is an issue we're going to continue to look at. It's coming up to 10 minutes to 6 with Checkpoint on RNZ. The Electricity Authority is under fire after a report into controversial power transmission pricing was found to have serious flaws. The electricity market regulator will carry out another cost-benefit analysis of the proposed pricing changes after the initial report was found to be riddled with errors. An issue here, the cost of upgrades to the national grid. In short, fairly broad brushstrokes, the proposal shifted costs north. That was controversial, but in the debate around the price changes, critics also sounded warnings about errors in the work they were predicated on. And it turns out they were right. Edward O'Driscoll reports.
The Electricity Authority has been consulting with the sector on proposed new guidelines for setting transmission prices, including the costs and benefits of the proposed changes. But the Chief Executive of the Authority, Carl Hansen, says the report by Australian consultants Oakley Greenwood contained a number of errors and it can't rely on it.
We could not be sure whether the results of the cost-benefit assessment were an overestimate, an underestimate or about right. As we could not reasonably rely on it, we've decided to seek a new cost-benefit assessment.
Mr Hansen won't say how much the report cost, but he will seek a refund. The authority has been in the gun over draft rules that would have meant people who benefited from grid upgrades, such as those in Auckland, would pay more of the cost of electricity transmission, while other consumers, such as the large Bluff smelter, would have paid less. However, despite seeking a new analysis, the Electricity Authority says its draft rules remain in place. The Employers and Manufacturers Association's chief executive, John Campbell, says the whole process needs to be overhauled.
The authority has found profound mistakes in the modelling that was done in the business case, which would ultimately justify a transmission pricing method changing.
Northland Power Company North Power says the decision to order a new review of transmission pricing was the only reasonable action the authority could take. It says power companies alerted the authority last year to a raft of errors and flaws in its cost-benefit analysis of proposed new charges for the national grid. A company spokesman, Steve McMillan, says this time around, both industry and MBIE should be involved in the review.
One of the big flaws here is that there's been no mechanism to look at the impact of on the regions like Northland and other areas, Kawerau being another. Those things really need to be taken into consideration with this looked at again with fresh eyes.
Northland MP Winston Peters says the authority is incompetent. He says New Zealand First told it repeatedly last year that its analysis was faulty.
This authority was told countless times by us in numerous media releases and opinion editorials and parliamentary questions that their methodology was wrong, and they arrogantly attacked us. And now all of a sudden, having been found out, they're blaming the very model that we said was defective in the first place.
A final decision on the pricing will be delayed until next year, but the changes are still expected to happen in 2020. For Checkpoint, Edward O'Driscoll.
8 minutes to 6 to Invercargill now, where police have just confirmed reports Checkpoint has been hearing throughout the day that off-duty police officer Ben McLean has been charged with murder after the death of his wife Verity just after 8 p.m. last night. Mr McLean, who's been a police officer since 2007, has also been charged with the attempted murder of a man aged in his 40s at a court hearing which was held at Southland Hospital this afternoon. The incident just happened just after 8 o'clock last night in an industrial area in the Invercargill suburb of Newfield. Checkpoint has confirmed the McLeans, who have 3 children, had recently separated. The Southern District Commander Superintendent Paul Basham confirmed at a media conference a short time ago the injured man has been treated for gunshot wounds in hospital and assisting police in their investigation. Police officers from outside the district have also been brought in to assist. Now, Superintendent Basham said the weapon used in the incident was not a police issue weapon. That just happened in Invercargill. We're going to move on now to the case of the McCanns. Boy, this is one of the world's most publicised missing persons investigations ever, really. British detectives investigating the disappearance of Madeleine McCann say a crucial line of inquiry is still being pursued 10 years after she went missing. The 3-year-old disappeared from her family's holiday apartment at a resort in Portugal in 2007. Here's the BBC's Tom Simons.
10 years, no answers.
A desperate search with the media following every step. What happened? Where is Madeleine McCann? This is still a missing persons inquiry. Despite 2014's extensive police searches in Portugal, there is no definitive evidence she is dead. For 6 years, with government money, the Metropolitan Police have been reviewing everything from scratch.
We have a significant line of inquiry which is worth pursuing, and because it's worth pursuing, it could provide an answer, but until we've gone through it, I won't know whether we're going to get there or not.
And that's all the police are saying. This investigation was once pursued by up to 30 officers. Now there are just 4 on the case and a handful of leads. But while there is still something to investigate, there is still hope. Madeleine's parents have described the 10-year anniversary as a horrible marker of stolen time. They've released a statement promising never to give up. There have been many challenges and low points along the way, they said, but the warmth, encouragement and positivity we've experienced from the quiet majority has undoubtedly sustained us and maintained our faith in human goodness. Her 14th birthday is the week after next.
Tom Simons reporting there. Detectives continue to work on the case in Britain. 4 of them, that's down from 30 detectives 6 years ago. An estimated $20 million has been spent on the British inquiry into Madeleine's disappearance so far. 4.5 to 6, so much feedback coming in on Anzac and that protest that was on in the program. The young man in your bulletin is to be commended for his outspokenness, something we should encourage in the young. However, it's important that he's got the message along the way that war is a futile waste of mostly young men's lives. Sebastian Faulks's Birdsong or Pat Barker's Regeneration trilogy should be compulsory reading for those hell-bent on commemorating the 100th anniversary of World War I. A generation of men were lost or were less than satisfactory fathers to their own children because of this war, and no human being should ever have to go through that again. That is the point of Anzac Day, lest we forget what a terrible experience war is. Compromise and peace is by far the better alternative, says Judith Parkinson from Wellington. Thank you, Judith. And Magnus Mountbatten says, I'm a veteran of Bosnia, Afghanistan ×3 and Iraq with the British Army. I think the kid has a point and he's welcome to it, and good on him for sharing his point of view. I think the protesters also have a point, and my full support to them. It's easy to commemorate the easy wars, the ones we won and got to definitely say we were the goodies and defeated the baddies, and can write the history and ignore our less savoury actions like killing thousands of civilians in bombing raids or dropping a nuclear weapon. It's always harder and less clear victories like Vietnam, Afghanistan, etc., or even the Māori wars, other colonial adventures. It's a bit uncomfortable to have to admit our hands may be bloody and our actions not truly just, and the political motives a bit murky. That's a longer email from Magnus, but we really appreciate your feedback. Lots of support for the right of the protesters to be silently there. You are with Checkpoint. It's 3 minutes to 6. Coming up, news at 6 with Katrina. But just before we move on, a delightful story, and perhaps we need it tonight, from Taranaki that caught our attention via Brittany Baker and her colleagues at Fairfax. It's simply about a cat in Inglewood that had 2 homes, both in complete ignorance of the other. Now, cats, bless them, do this. In fact, I have a sneaking suspicion that our cat Peggy may be running a similar racket in our neighbourhood. I'm on to you, Peggy, if you're listening. But it's rare to find such a conclusive evidence of a feline double life. And Shirley Bishop thought Simba was hers and hers alone. Sure, he disappeared somewhere, but sometimes, but cats go off on adventures, right? At least that's what Shirley thought Simba was doing, or Crazy Horse, as he was also known.
But we hadn't seen him for about a week, and then he turned up on Sunday night, and he was having a feed, and I noticed he had stitches in his shoulder. And I thought, oh my God, someone's taken him to the vet. So then on Monday I went down to the vet, but they couldn't tell me anything because of the Privacy Act. They could tell me the street, but anyway, that was all right. So I thought I'd put something on the Inglewood Town Hub Facebook page to see if anybody knew anything. And Michaela messaged me, and as it turns out, I knew her anyway, prior to this, and they had taken him to the vet because he'd had a hole on the side of his neck that the vet thought he'd been bitten by a dog. So they took him to the vet and had a drain in and all sorts of things. And anyway, I came round and see him, and then the newspaper rang, and we came round and had a story with the newspaper. And the stitches are out and he's fine. But see, he stays here during the day on her deck, and then he comes round about 6 o'clock to our place, just around the corner, has another feed and a cuddle, and then comes back to Michaela's.
What a lovely
There's
life.
a bit of aroma.
Yeah, and you call him Simba. What does Michaela call him?
Crazy horse. But, he's lovely. But it was just so funny that it ended up that I knew the house where he was actually going back and forth from. So we decided we'd share custody because at the end of the day, he's just going to go where he wants to go, So, yeah, that's how it came about.
Shirley with the delightful story of Simba, aka Crazy Horse, and the 2 homes he was successfully maintaining until stitches blew his ruse. Lots more feedback coming in. This from Michael Smythe, who quotes Harry Patch, who I think at the time was the last surviving soldier of World War I. He said, "I felt then as I feel now that the politicians who took us to war should have been given the guns and told to settle their differences themselves instead of organising nothing better than legalised mass murder." Coming up after the 6 o'clock news, we return to the subject of immigration.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batt and tēnei. An Invercargill police officer has been charged with the murder of a woman and the attempted murder of another man, both known to him. The police have this evening named the officer as Constable Ben McLean. They were called to a house on Otupuni Avenue in Newfield shortly after 8 o'clock last night, where they found a woman dead and a man with gunshot wounds. That man remains in a stable condition in hospital. The police say the charges were laid against Mr McLean at his hospital bedside earlier this afternoon. They say the 3 of them are known to each other and they'll not be releasing the woman's name yet. The Immigration Minister acknowledges immigration is one factor in the pressure on cities, including Auckland, but says the solution is to increase supply in the likes of housing. Net migration in the year to March hit a new record of nearly 72,000, driven by high numbers of students, backpackers and returning New Zealanders. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Last week, the government moved to tighten the rules for skilled work visas and limit the time unskilled workers can stay in the country. Labor says that's not enough and it wants an urgent review of immigration policy. The Minister Michael Woodhouse says strong migration is one factor putting pressure on Auckland, but the government is working to build more housing and ensure there's adequate transport infrastructure. And he says Labor should front up and say exactly how many numbers it would cut from immigration if in government. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Prime Minister, Bill English, doesn't expect news about New Zealand's past spying on Japan to affect any future visits to the country. A leaked NSA document from 2007 says the GCSB helped the United States to spy on Japan at an International Whaling Commission meeting that year. The Intercept website has published the paper, obtained from the whistleblower Edward Snowden. Mr English won't comment on any specifics, only saying the GCSB must follow the law.
That law has just been overhauled quite significantly with the support of the overwhelming majority of the Parliament, and we would expect them to continue to comply with the law.
Bill English says Japan has not demanded that New Zealand explain itself. The Japanese embassy says it's not in a position to comment. New Zealand First is backing its Chief of Staff, David Broome, whose 12-year-old son reprimanded a peace activist during yesterday's Anzac service in Wellington. The boy started yelling at Laura Drew, who was doing a media interview, saying it was wrong and inappropriate to be protesting against New Zealand's involvement in war. New Zealand First leader Winston Peters agrees and says there are 364 other more appropriate days in the year to protest. He says free speech is an essential part of democracy, but it's wrong to criticise people at an event where many are mourning the loss of loved ones. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce believes there will be good face-to-face chemistry when the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull meets the US President Donald Trump in New York next week. The pair got off to a difficult start with a testy phone call earlier this year. The ABC's Caitlin Gribben reports.
It'll be the first face-to-face encounter between the two leaders and coincides with commemorations for the Battle of the Coral Sea. The trip comes after a testy phone call earlier this year over a refugee deal between the two countries, but Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce says meeting in person will be different.
I think there is something of chemistry when two people meet face-to-face, which is probably not present over a phone call.
In a statement, Mr Turnbull says the meeting will provide an opportunity to reaffirm Australia's alliance and the United States' engagement with the Asia-Pacific.
Caitlin Gribben reporting. The Mayor of Nelson City says challenges around removing a man who took up residence on a pavement in the central city have helped shape a new bylaw. Inner city businesses don't want long-time vagrant Lewis Stanton camping in Trafalgar Street and hanging out his laundry in the trees. Mr Stanton and his supporters argue he's entitled to be there. Mayor Rachel Rees says they've tried many ways to resolve the matter, and a proposed bylaw will provide a system where the council can protect how the inner city looks.
And I think it's fair to say that Nelson's worked on the power of suggestion, doing the right thing. We have found that we've actually got to provide a system now that can protect that and improve it.
The Nelson Mayor, Rachel Rees. Mr Stanton is currently serving a 3-month prison sentence for punching a man in the face during a protest over his occupation. It's 6:05. To sport, the Wellington Phoenix say they haven't even spoken to former England football international Stuart Pearce, let alone offered him the role of head coach. An Australian media report says Pearce has been offered the Phoenix job, but club general manager David Dome denies that. Our sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
The Adelaide Advertiser says the 54-year-old Pearce has been shopped around the A-League's vacant management jobs and is mulling over a Phoenix offer. But David Dome says while the club received Pearce's CV, they've decided not to pursue him any further. Pearce played 78 internationals for England and 750 club matches at various levels in the English game. Incumbent coaches at the Phoenix, Des Buckingham and Chris Greenacre, were both interviewed for the role last week, and the club expects to make an appointment before the end of May. This is Stephen Hewson.
The heavyweight boxing champion Joseph Parker is relieved his 3-month training camp has not been in vain. Parker, the WBO title holder, will fight 2-metre-tall Romanian Răzvan Cojanu in Auckland next week after mandatory challenger Hughie Fury withdrew from the fight last week citing a back injury. Parker has previously sparred with Cojanu and rates the Romanian as more dangerous than Fury. The competition-leading Southern Steel play the first of 4 matches in 11 days when they play the Northern Stars in the ANZ Netball Premiership in Auckland tonight. The Steel are unbeaten in 4 matches, while the Stars have won just 1 of their 5 games and sit second to last in the competition. That's the news.
Who gets to come into New Zealand?
We cannot continue to jam in the number of people coming from overseas to settle here at the levels that we have done for the last 2 years and now for the 3rd year in a row.
And who makes the call on whether criminals can stay?
There's nothing neutral about these sorts of decisions. They're very emotive and they're very political.
And should you protest against war on Anzac Day?
This is just another day to have those conversations about, did our armed forces commit war crimes?
Asking the hard questions. Guy and Aspinall and Susie Ferguson, morning reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the rise of no-win, no-fee cases in New Zealand. Are they redressing power imbalances in the justice system? And after 10, how to be a Bose. Actress, comedian and YouTube phenomenon Lily Singh on her no-nonsense manual for millennials on how to make it to the top. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, fine spells, isolated showers today, mainly in the east. The remainder of the North Island, mainly fine. Some areas of low cloud or fog tonight and tomorrow morning. Isolated showers developing tomorrow morning across the ranges of Taranaki, Kapiti and Wellington. Western Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, fine today. Cloudy periods and a few light showers tomorrow, especially about the ranges. For the remainder of Marlborough and Canterbury to Southland, fine today but high cloud developing tomorrow with a few spots of rain developing in the south during the evening. Westland and Fiordland mostly cloudy with a few light showers turning to rain in Fiordland this evening and elsewhere tomorrow. Northerlies strengthening tomorrow with gales in exposed places. The Chatham Islands mostly cloudy, fine breaks developing later tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Busy old evening on the breaking news front. Police say a fisherman has found a body in Wattle Bay, which is in Manukau Heads in Auckland. They say it's too early to say yet whether it is the body of a 52-year-old fisherman who went missing last week. The man was fishing with his 8-year-old daughter last Wednesday when their runabout flipped. You will remember this because the girl was pulled from the harbour after treading water for several hours. So a body has been found in Wattle Bay in Manukau Heads in Auckland. That from police. We got an email from Steve saying, John, never mind what is the right level of immigration. How about what is the right population size? Why will nobody discuss this? Well, Shamabeel Jacob would agree with you, Steve. Record immigration numbers again, 129,500 arrivals in the year to March. Subtract 57,600 departures and you have that net gain of 71,900. As an aside, to put those figures in some kind of context, there were 61,000 live births in New Zealand in 2005. The 2006 figures aren't available yet. Immigration numbers are, of course, very much on the political agenda, as they often are in election year. Remember, National was swept to power in 2008 after a campaign featuring an attack on New Zealand's net migration loss, all those New Zealanders heading for Australia. Economist Shamabeel Jacob says that's the confounding issue. In 2008, there were too few immigrants. In 2017, too many. So what is the number we actually want, and who are they? He's addressed this repeatedly in his calls for a population strategy that transcends and perhaps defines immigration politics and policy. At the moment, he says our national response seems confused, confusing and inconsistent.
Look, 5 years ago, we were lamenting net losses of people, and 5 years on, we're worried about having too many people. The net migration numbers we're seeing today are predictable in that Kiwis are not leaving for Australia. We've had policies that have wanted more students, and we've had massive skill shortages that are being met by work visas.
OK, but now, of course, very much on the agenda as we approach an election is the response to these numbers. Michael Woodhouse and the government's initiative last week, what did you make of that?
Oh, I was confused. I think the policies were very confusing. On the one hand, they were telling us that it's not going to have any impact on immigration numbers. Then you wonder why have these policies at all. On the other hand, they're saying that somehow we need to have increased skills of the migrants that are coming in. And yet we know that the types of skill shortages that we're facing in New Zealand are quite different in Auckland and IT versus hospitality in Queenstown versus farm workers in Southland. There are lots of different types of skills that we need in terms of migrants that are coming in. So I don't really know what the outcome is, what the goal is. And that is probably the biggest issue with any conversation on immigration. We don't know what we're meant to be doing with immigration.
And then, and I want to return to the point you just made, but let's look at the political responses. Now you have Andrew Little saying reduce immigration by tens of thousands. What's your take on that?
Well, I think politically it makes absolute sense. Everybody wants to get on the bandwagon of immigration is terrible, we're going to reduce it. And everybody's thinking about some kind of, headline to get out there. But I'm not, again, sure what tens of thousands mean. Does it mean we're going to be pulling back on student visas, residence visas, work visas, or are we going to stop New Zealanders from leaving? There is not enough substance around these political rhetorics. And I think the big narrative is around we need to have a population strategy. Right now we have immigration because we have immigration. But I don't think that's a good enough reason. We need to know, are we getting more migrants in because we want to target a population of, say, 15 million in 100 years' time? That's a number out of the air. But without having some kind of target and some kind of purpose in terms of why we want to have that many people, it's very difficult to have these conversations. And right now it seems to me like we're using immigration as a shorthand for economic growth. We're using it as a shorthand for not training enough of our own people. We're using it as a buffer for businesses to be able to bring in people because they're not able to invest in their own workers and bring them up to scratch. It's a very complex issue, but it just feels like we're not having the core issue at the bottom, which is around a population strategy and how many people we want and how do we get there.
Is immigration responsible for the stress on infrastructure in Auckland and for the housing crisis in Auckland?
Look, right now it's absolutely a contributing factor. Population growth is extraordinarily fast. But when we look over a long period of time, we know that with both housing and infrastructure, it's gotten steadily worse. Even when immigration went negative, we were not able to catch up. I think the problem for us is we're underinvesting in infrastructure, we're underinvesting in housing, We have been doing that for a number of decades.
And sorry to interrupt, Shamabil, but you also said we're under-investing in training, right? So we don't have the kind of skills we need, and we're not providing them at home.
Well, I think it's a tragedy. So if you think about the skills that were needed in the Canterbury earthquake, we were not able to fill that from New Zealand, even though we had the worst recession in the construction sector at the time. Even then, we were not able to bring the workers in from the rest of New Zealand. We still had to rely on foreign workers, which is fine. I think it's very helpful for us to have that buffer. But if the starting point is a position of deficit in terms of not having enough trained technicians, qualified people in trades and workers, then it tells you that there is something structurally wrong.
How do we have the immigration debate without cynicism, without vilification, without blaming in a simplistic kind of way? And that's not me being condescending, but if we look at Brexit, if we look at Trump, if we look at the rise of nationalism in Europe, how do we have this conversation without ending up at those points?
Well, I think it starts with having that conversation about population. If we know that there is an agreed target, agreed goal of growing New Zealand's population, then I think that's a very good point to start. And then we can say, what kinds of people do we want to come here? Whether it's people with skills, whether people with trades, whether it's people with money, whatever it might be, we can have a much more considered discussion around the types of people who are coming. But right now, we're only having a conversation about the types of people without some kind of overarching goal. I don't think you can ever take away some of that cynicism and racism that will inevitably come with immigration. The reality is that we know that humans are very tribal, and new groups are the easiest to pick on. They always feel like the other group, and they are the other group. But it doesn't mean that we can't have this conversation. The leadership has to come from government. The leadership has to come from politicians. But right now, to be quite frank, I'm not seeing it.
Shamabil Jacob, economist, of course, talking to us earlier. We'd love your feedback on that. Text 21001 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Lots of feedback coming in on the Anzac protest, and we'll have more of that later in the program. Invercargill police say they're devastated and dismayed that one of their serving officers was today charged with murder after his wife was shot dead last night at an unusual court appearance, to say the least, held at Southern Hospital this afternoon. Off-duty police officer Ben McLean was charged with the murder of his wife and the attempted murder of another man aged in his 40s. The alleged shooting, well, it was obviously a shooting, happened just after 8 o'clock last night in an industrial area in the suburb of Newfield. At a police media conference held in Invercargill a short time ago, the Southern District Commander Superintendent Paul Basham said Mr McLean handed himself in 40 minutes after the shooting occurred. He said the firearm used was not a police issue weapon, but he would not confirm whether the firearm was a hunting weapon. Superintendent Basham said 30 other officers had been brought in to assist with the investigation from Christchurch and Dunedin, and the situation was tough for the police. The injured man is being treated for gunshot wounds in hospital and is also assisting the police in their investigation. That is the latest from Invercargill, bringing the time to 6. In Wellington this week, the New Zealand Society for Earthquake Engineering is holding its annual technical conference. So far, so pro forma really. But after the Kaikoura earthquake, roughly 100 foreign experts are also taking part in the conference. And the New Zealand conference is being held jointly with a World Conference on Seismic Isolation. The reasons why are obvious, really. Kaikoura saw a significant seabed rise, major land damage outside a city, major damage to road and rail infrastructure, communities cut off, as well as building damage in the capital city, Wellington. So as a case study, it operates across a very broad spectrum and very much under discussion why some buildings do better than others. Building resilience. Dr. David Whittaker is the conference convener. He says last November's quake has proven a major drawcard for the conference.
The Kaikoura earthquake, I think, was a story of astonishing ground movement that the geologists tell us about in the northern South Island along the Kaikoura coast. And also surprising levels of ground shaking that happened in Wellington City, particularly on the waterfront. So it's really around disruptions to infrastructure on the Kaikoura coast and disruptions to buildings in Wellington.
Yes, and one of the interesting aspects of the conference is a discussion of the resilience of building construction. Now, we've talked about this with Nick Smith on this program in the context of what happened to some buildings in Wellington, and I asked him, would we be able to build earthquake-proof buildings at some stage, and he said, well, I don't think it'll be in our lifetime. What is your sense of where we are at with a meaningful resilience to earthquakes?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The term earthquake-proof is a term that earthquake engineers don't like to use. We don't claim to be able to design buildings to be earthquake-proof that won't be damaged or disrupted by earthquakes. But it's a conversation we need to have, because eventually I think the community is expecting us to be able to design more earthquake-proof buildings than what we've been doing. While we've done a pretty good job about providing safety, life safety in buildings, we haven't yet really come to grips with how to design buildings to be less disrupted and to have less damage and have to be vacated and repaired. So as part of this conference, some of the topics and some of the experts from around the world are going to address this question of where are we on the journey to possibly being able to do earthquake-proof buildings, the holy grail, if you like. And I think there are some people that are comfortable using that term and would say that we already have the technologies for doing providing earthquake-proof buildings.
Is that a design thing or a materials thing?
Well, it's both. The materials have to be strong enough and resilient enough to perform under very severe shaking. But the technologies that are there, like base isolation, and we have many examples in New Zealand and in Wellington, are leading the way to where building design has to go. We're now talking the language of low damage design. So in Wellington, the Wellington fault event, when it happens, is expected to be of magnitude 7.5, or slightly bigger. And it comes along around the latest estimate's around every 900 years, so not very often. But when it happens, our job is to make sure that people survive in those buildings. And we treat the damage as a secondary thing, but I think people are expecting better avoidance of damage in our designs. And that will have to be reflected in the code. And it's a difficult balancing act about how much you mandate to the community in codes of practice and how much you leave to owners to decide for themselves, with market forces driving where you design more resilient, stronger, and more forgiving buildings.
Dr. David Whittaker, who's the conference convener. It's taking place in Wellington tomorrow and Friday, I think. Yemen doesn't get much news coverage, which suggests that whatever the criteria for what does get coverage and doesn't get coverage is not based on the magnitude of suffering. After 2 years of civil war, there are over 7 million people in Yemen facing famine. Many more are hungry, homeless, displaced, all of the above. Maybe the problem is too big, but to give it a human face, the head of the UN has just declared that on average, every 10 minutes, a child under the age of 5 dies of preventable causes in Yemen. Every 10 minutes, under the age of 5. The UN is hosting a meeting in Geneva to raise donor funds to help. And as a preview to that meeting, which has been taking place, in fact, the BBC's Imogen Foulkes filed this report.
This month, the International Committee of the Red Cross took a camera into one of Yemen's few hospitals, which remain open. The images are now being shown to the conference in Geneva. Chaotic scenes. Men, women and children injured in the conflict wait for treatment, side by side with malnourished babies. The shelves in the pharmacy are bare. There are constant power shortages.
The humanitarian situation in Yemen today is, I think, nothing short of catastrophic.
Robert Mardini is the ICRC's Director of Operations for the Middle East. He recently completed an assessment mission to Yemen. He found a catastrophe of staggering proportions.
The country is getting less than 30% of the medicine it needs. It is getting less than 50% of what it needs in terms of food. So clearly the country today is living on its reserve, and day after day the country is getting closer to famine. Life has become unbearable.
Most unbearable of all for children. Mohammed Kassim is just 12 years old. His childhood has been shattered by the conflict. He's now a patient in that Yemen hospital.
While I was playing, our house was hit in an air raid. My brother and I were injured. The house fell on me. They took me to the hospital. I was unconscious. I didn't know where I was.
Mohammed has been in hospital for almost a month. He has serious injuries to his head, his eye and his leg.
Before I was injured, I used to go to school. I used to be happy.
Over 1,000 schools have been damaged in the conflict. Of Yemen's 7.2 million school-aged children, 2 million are now not going to school. Repairing such massive destruction will take years. A more immediate worry is famine. The very youngest children are the most vulnerable, says Christophe Boulierac of UNICEF.
Yemen used to be the poorest country in the Middle East. It's now the largest food security emergency in the world. You have close to 500,000 children who suffer from severe acute malnutrition.
That is really one step before starvation.
Yes, you're right. It's extremely serious, and yes, there are some risk of famine in Yemen, especially for the most vulnerable, clearly.
The United Nations will today ask donor countries for $2.1 billion to fund its relief operation in Yemen. Major aid agencies also want to see a halt to arms sales to countries involved in the conflict and more focus on getting peace talks back on track. 12-year-old Mohammed's wishes are more simple, things every child should have a right to.
I wish that I will recover soon and that all the injured will recover soon as well. I wish for peace in Yemen so that I can go back to school again.
There was 12-year-old Yemeni boy Mohammed ending that report from Imogen. Folks, now the meeting has wrapped up and the UN Secretary-General has described it as a remarkable success, saying $1 billion has been secured from donor countries. That was taking place in Geneva overnight, our time. Lots of feedback tonight on this issue of whether or not you can protest at an Anzac Day commemoration. Overwhelmingly, the feedback we've received, and there's been a lot of it, thank you, says you can. Dear John, as I listen to your show tonight while I cook dinner, thank you, Hannah. We like people cooking as they listen to us. I'm grateful again this year Anzac Day fell in the school holidays. Our national emphasis on Anzac Day frightens me in its subtle, persuasive idea that we should be unified around this memory. My daughters make every type of poppy at school and know what things I was never taught at their age, but they still don't know most of our history or what parihaka is. Every year I need to protect them from what feels like a swelling tide of basically propaganda. A 12-year-old boy's sense of respect and propriety has been shaped. I would rather my children honoured the other brave people like Archibald Baxter, who said, "Do what you will to me, war is always senseless." To unify ourselves around the memory of one senselessness at the cost of not knowing the others often speeds the next senselessness. To promote peace on Anzac Day seems to be the most appropriate of all days. Mr. Winston. Regards, Hannah. Thank you all for your feedback on that subject and indeed your feedback across the board. You are enthusiastic engagers and we are very grateful for it. Tonight we're going to end with a story that may have in part be scripted by Benny Hill, and you'll know exactly what I mean when I get to that part of the intro. In fact, if we had the Benny Hill music, we'd run it underneath. Finding your soulmate can be hard. So many turn to dating apps in their quest to find the one. On Tinder, there's a new single guy on the market, and as the BBC's Tim Ormond reports, this rare and very eligible bachelor who lives in Kenya is, wait for it, a bit of a horny animal.
Sudan. He is literally one of a kind. The last male northern white rhino on Earth. And what do you do if you're feeling lonely these days? Go online.
Tinder is going to launch a profile for our Rhino Sudan. It's going to be broadcasted in 190 countries and in 40 languages, which is really the first time Tinder does something like that, to that scale.
On his profile, Sudan claims to perform well under pressure, says he likes to eat grass and chill in the mud, and admits to being 6 foot tall and weighing 5,000 pounds. That's more than 2,000 kilos. Obviously, Sudan is not really looking to hook up online. This is all about raising around $9 million needed for fertility treatment. Sudan having failed to breed successfully the old-fashioned way with 2 female northern white rhinos. But there are thousands of southern white rhinos who might be able to help.
This is something which is going to have to be replicated and done at scale. And then we're going to have a breeding program in Kenya to continue to build the number of northern whites so that eventually we have sufficient numbers ultimately to be able to reintroduce them back into the Garamba National Park.
The whole project could take 10 or even 15 years, and Sudan is 43. That's almost 100 in rhino years. So, swipe right while you can.
Yes, indeed, that report from the BBC. Just if you've just tuned in, Invercargill Police say they're devastated and dismayed that one of their serving officers was today charged with murder after his wife was shot dead last night. An unusual court appearance held at Southern Hospital this afternoon saw off-duty police officer Ben McLean charged with the murder of his wife and the attempted murder of another man aged in his 40s. The shooting happened just after 8 o'clock last night in an industrial area in the suburb of Newfield in Invercargill. At a police media conference held in the city a short time ago, the Southern District Commander, Superintendent Paul Basham, said Mr McLean handed himself in 40 minutes after the shooting. He said the firearm used was not a police issue weapon, but he would not confirm whether it was a hunting weapon. All of that happened in the last hour or so in Invercargill. That is the end of Checkpoint for tonight. Thank you for being with us. We appreciate your company on behalf of our really excellent little team who do a fantastic job every night. We will be back with you at 5 o'clock tomorrow. We hope to see you then.
RNZ news headlines at 6:30. An Invercargill police officer has been charged with the murder of a woman and the attempted murder of another man, both known to him. The government admits immigration is a factor in the pressure on cities, including Auckland. The police cannot confirm if a body found in Auckland Harbour is that of a 52-year-old fisherman who went missing 6 days ago. Winston Peters is backing the 12-year-old son of his chief of staff, who reprimanded a peace activist protesting during yesterday's Anzac service in Wellington. And Nelson's mayor says challenges around stopping a long-time vagrant camping in the central city and hanging out his laundry in the trees has helped shape a new bylaw. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Join us on Country Life each week as we take you off the beaten track to meet people who have spent a lifetime working on the land.
We lived a lot on three-course meals, bread, butter and jam,